He filed for divorce over a younger woman, so she revealed something he never imagined. The sun hadn't yet set when a woman stood at the kitchen counter, folding the last of the freshly laundered towels. The smell of garlic and rosemary filled the house from the stew simmering on the stove. It was an ordinary Wednesday. After 22 years of marriage, she could read her husband's every move, but that night, she missed the signal. He walked in, loosened his tie, and without so much as a greeting, dropped a folded envelope on the counter. "We need to talk," he said, not meeting her eyes. The air in the room shifted. She opened the envelope with trembling fingers, and when she read the word divorce, her knees buckled slightly. "What is this?" she asked, stunned. He replied flatly, "I've met someone. She's younger. This isn't working anymore." The room felt colder than it had a minute ago. The woman, once confident and proud of the home she'd built, now stood still, her breath shallow, like she was learning how to exist again. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "After everything? 22 years, 3 children, all those nights I stayed awake waiting for you?" He didn't respond right away. "She makes me feel alive," he finally said. "You're different now. You've become someone else." She stood silent, unsure whether to cry, scream, or laugh. He grabbed a pre-packed bag and walked out the door. The stew on the stove bubbled over and burned at the edges, forgotten. She still set the table for 2 that night, as if muscle memory couldn't accept the truth. The candles flickered, casting shadows on the wall, and the silence was louder than any shouting match could have been. His chair sat untouched across from her, a cruel reminder of everything that was gone. The fork in her hand trembled slightly, and though the stew had gone cold, she forced herself to take a bite. Chewing felt like swallowing glass. The walls of the dining room, once filled with laughter and stories, now felt like they were closing in on her. The only sound came from the ticking clock above the fireplace, tick-tock, a painful metronome marking the seconds of her abandonment. After dinner, she walked to the hallway mirror and stared at herself. Her once sharp features were now softened by age and responsibility, but there was still beauty in her eyes, though it was hiding beneath layers of exhaustion. She traced the lines around her mouth with her fingertips, trying to recognize the woman looking back at her. In the reflection, she didn't see the burden he described. She saw a woman who sacrificed, who raised a family, who stood by a man through thick and thin. Different, he had said. But wasn't change part of the journey? She turned off the lights and went to bed alone for the first time in more than 2 decades, hugging a pillow that didn't hug back. The scent hit her before she even opened the passenger door. It was sweet, youthful, and unmistakably out of place, floral and light, like something worn by someone who still saw the world as a place of promises instead of responsibilities. She leaned into the car to retrieve a grocery bag and noticed the silk scarf wrapped around the gearshift. Pale pink, with lipstick stains. Her heart sank. This wasn't a dream. This wasn't a mistake. He hadn't just walked away, he had walked toward someone else, someone he proudly paraded in the seat she once occupied. Her fingers hesitated before touching the scarf, as if it might burn her. In that moment, she understood, she had been replaced, not just left. When he came by the next day to pick up more of his things, she confronted him. "She wears jasmine, doesn't she?" He blinked, caught off guard. "It doesn't matter," he said, brushing past her. "You'll move on. You're strong." His words stung more than they soothed. Jasmine. That used to be her favorite perfume in her 20s. Was that the appeal? A younger version of who she used to be. "You didn't just leave me," she said softly, You replaced me with someone who doesn't know what sacrifice tastes like." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence told her everything. Weeks passed, and though her eyes had dried, her spirit remained fractured. The final blow came during a conversation she never asked for. He called, not to apologize or check on her, but to gloat. "She's refreshing," he said. "She listens. She still dreams. You stopped dreaming years ago." The words cut deep, each one a cold blade reminding her of every birthday dinner she skipped cooking for herself, every date night she postponed so he could rest from work, every dream she shelved to build his reality. "She reminds me of you," he added, "back when you were interesting." That sentence, spoken casually, like a passing thought, shattered whatever was left of her composure. She sat in silence after the call ended, holding the phone like it might bite her again. "Back when I was interesting," she repeated to herself. It was funny, he spoke of dreams, but he never asked about hers. He never noticed how she kept the house filled with warmth, how she learned new recipes, or how she still journaled at night about the places she wanted to travel someday. He didn't see her anymore because he had stopped looking. She placed the phone on the table and closed her eyes. She wouldn't let his words define her. Not anymore. If he thought the best of her was in the past, he clearly hadn't seen what she was capable of becoming. The day the final divorce papers arrived, the mailman apologized, as if handing her those documents was somehow his fault. She took the envelope and walked inside slowly, sitting at the same kitchen table where she once signed birthday cards and school permission slips. Her name was printed beside his, like it had been for decades, but now it was flanked by the word dissolution. She signed the pages with a hand that trembled only for a second. With each stroke of the pen, she felt a strange mix of grief and relief. This wasn't how she pictured her future, but maybe, just maybe, she could build a new one from the ashes. That night, she poured herself a glass of wine, not to drown sorrow, but to toast closure. She stepped outside to the porch, where stars blinked softly overhead, and whispered, "Thank you." Not to him, but to the version of herself that had endured betrayal and still found the strength to stand. The pages were signed, the chapter closed. Tomorrow was no longer tied to him. And though the silence of the house still stung, it no longer felt like a punishment. It felt like space, wide, open space, to begin again. The following week, he came by one last time under the pretense of picking up old documents. But it quickly became clear he was looking for something else, validation. "You got comfortable," he said, scanning the living room like it had lost value. "You stopped growing. I need someone who inspires me." She took a deep breath, trying to suppress the fire rising in her chest. "Inspiration?" she echoed. "I gave you everything. I put my dreams on pause so yours could run ahead. And now you call that stagnation?" He didn't answer with remorse, just with that familiar condescending tone. "Maybe if you'd taken better care of yourself. Of us." She gave a short, humorless laugh. "Do you hear yourself? You're justifying betrayal with loyalty." He turned and walked away like he'd said something profound. But she didn't cry, not this time. The pain had crystallized into something sharper. And with it, the first spark of something new, resolve. On what would have been their 23rd wedding anniversary, she awoke with a strange heaviness in her chest. The calendar still had a hand-drawn heart on the date, a habit she never missed. Out of reflex, she brewed coffee and sat quietly. In another life, she would have cooked his favorite meal, worn the red dress, lit the candles. Instead, she opened her phone and scrolled through social media. And there it was, a photo of him and the younger woman at a beachfront dinner. Champagne. Matching smiles. The caption, "To new memories." She stared at the screen not with heartbreak, but with disbelief. The man who once forgot her birthday was now toasting anniversaries with someone new. The man who once said dates were just numbers was suddenly sentimental. She closed the app and set the phone down. That day no longer marked an ending. It was now a beginning. She didn't know what lay ahead, but she silently promised herself that no future anniversary would ever find her in pieces again. That afternoon, her phone rang. It was her youngest son, studying out of state. His voice was warm but concerned. "Mom, I heard about the divorce. Why didn't you tell me?" She hesitated, her voice catching. "You had enough to worry about," she said softly. On the other end, his voice grew firm. "You've always had my back. Now it's my turn." His words reached places in her heart she didn't know were still alive. He began recounting childhood memories, how she'd stay up helping with school projects, how the smell of her cooking meant comfort. "You were the glue holding it all together," he said. "And you're still that person. Just because someone failed to see your worth doesn't mean it isn't there." She thanked him through quiet tears. For the first time since the divorce, she didn't feel alone. She felt seen. Spring arrived quietly, and with it came her urge to move. She dug her old bicycle out of the garage, tires flat, chain rusty. After fixing it up, she started riding around her neighborhood. The streets were familiar yet strangely new. She passed by places filled with memories, some beautiful, others heavy. But now, they no longer held her captive. She was moving, literally and figuratively, towards something unknown but hers. On her way home, she noticed a cozy little bakery with a faded "Help Wanted" sign in the window. Something about the simplicity called to her. She walked in, hesitated, and asked if the job was still open. The owner, a kind woman named Mrs. Kaplan, looked her up and down and smiled. "You've got hands that look like they've cared for people. That's more than enough." She left the bakery that day with an apron and a fresh start, small, modest, but undeniably her own. The bakery became her sanctuary. She arrived before sunrise, the scent of coffee and fresh bread wrapping around her like a second skin. She learned to knead dough, arrange pastries, handle difficult customers with a grace she didn't know she had. Mrs. Kaplan wasn't just a boss, she was a quiet mentor, someone who saw past the layers. "You've got something rare," she once said. "A softness that doesn't break." One day, a regular customer complimented the handmade apron she wore. "Where did you get that?" "It's beautiful." She blushed. "I made it." And just like that, the thread of her past came back into her hands. That evening, she pulled her old sewing machine out of the closet. It creaked as it powered on. Her fingers trembled as they fed fabric through the needle. But as the hum filled the room, something inside her clicked. It wasn't just a hobby anymore. It was a calling. The sewing machine quickly became her escape. After work, she would sit for hours, surrounded by scraps of fabric and vintage thread. Her first creations were modest, denim tote bags, patchwork aprons, but they carried pieces of her heart. Every stitch felt like reclaiming something lost. Her fingers moved with more confidence each night, and as the thread wove through the cloth, it also seemed to weave strength back into her soul. One rainy afternoon, she wore a homemade apron to the bakery. Mrs. Kaplan immediately noticed. "You made that?" she asked, touching the edge gently. When she nodded, the older woman smiled. "You should sell those." The idea felt absurd at first. Sell? Who would want anything from her? But the seed had been planted. That night, she pulled out a notebook and scribbled ideas. A brand. A vision. Something just for her. A few days later, a neighbor came by the bakery to pick up a cake and noticed the apron she wore. "Did you make that?" she asked. When she said yes, the neighbor's eyes lit up. "I've been looking for a simple dress for a tea party. Could you make one for me?" Her instinct was to decline, to deflect. But instead, she found herself saying, "Sure. I'd love to." She worked on the dress for 2 days straight, pouring herself into every detail. It was a soft navy blue, with simple lines and gentle stitching. When the neighbor tried it on, her eyes welled up. "I haven't felt pretty in years," she whispered. That one sentence echoed louder than any compliment ever had. It wasn't just a dress, it was healing. And that's when she realized her creations could be more than fabric. They could be stories. Word began to spread, quietly, like roots under soil. One neighbor told another. Orders trickled in, just enough to keep her nights full. She started organizing her fabrics by color, labeling drawers, drawing sketches late into the night. Her dining room slowly transformed into a miniature studio. She needed a name. Something that carried meaning. She chose Rebirth, because that's what it felt like, stitching a life back together, one piece at a time. Her youngest son noticed her momentum and offered to help set up an online page. They photographed her designs in the backyard, sunlight on linen, breeze catching the hem of a dress. Soon, the page had followers. Not many, but enough. Women commented things like, "This feels like me," and "I wish I had the courage to start again." She replied to each message with care. She wasn't just building a business. She was building a bridge, for herself, and for others. On a Saturday morning, dressed in one of her handmade dresses, she stopped at the supermarket on her way to a fabric store. The dress was simple, wine-colored, with a clean cut and a matching headscarf. She felt good, quietly proud. As she turned the corner near the dairy section, her breath caught. There he was. Her ex-husband, arm in arm with the younger woman. They laughed until they saw her. He looked her up and down, then smirked. "You look tired," he said, in that same familiar tone he used to use when diminishing her. The woman beside him chimed in, "This is your ex?" "You didn't say she was so plain." Her pulse spiked, but her face stayed calm. "Age teaches," she replied gently. "Too bad not everyone learns." Then she turned and walked away, not looking back. Inside, her heart was pounding. But not from shame. From power. That evening, she returned home and sat at her sewing machine. Her fingers moved faster than usual, driven by something deeper. She crafted a dress of white cotton with delicate navy embroidery, a color of peace and resilience. It was the opposite of armor. It was softness made strong. The insult from the supermarket echoed faintly, but didn't pierce her. Not anymore. She didn't tell her children about the run-in. It wasn't worth reliving. Instead, she posted a photo of the dress online with the caption, "Handmade." With history in the seams. The comments poured in. One woman wrote, "This dress looks like hope." Another said, "I don't know why, but this made me cry." She replied, maybe because it's made by someone who knows what it means to be broken and to choose beauty anyway. On a warm Sunday morning, while she was serving coffee at the bakery, a woman walked in wearing one of her dresses. But not just any woman, a local lifestyle influencer, known for showcasing handmade goods and small brands. "Are you the owner of Rebirth?" she asked, beaming. "I bought this at the community fair last week, and I'm obsessed." She blinked in disbelief. "Yes, I am," she replied quietly. The woman pulled out her phone. "Would you mind if I took a picture with you?" That same afternoon, the photo went live, captioned with, "Found a hidden gem today. This woman makes magic with fabric." By nightfall, her social media was flooded. Likes, shares, messages, orders. Not just from nearby, but from different parts of the country. Women reached out not just to buy dresses, but to share stories. "I'm divorced too. I just lost my job. Your story made me believe in myself again." The weight of it was overwhelming, but beautiful. She read every word, carefully, tenderly. This wasn't just a business anymore, it was a movement. And she was at the heart of it. 3 days later, someone knocked on her boutique's glass door just after closing time. She looked up and froze. It was him. Her ex-husband. He looked different now. Thinner. Tired. The lines on his face deeper, his posture weighed down. "I heard about the store," he said quietly. "I just had to see it for myself." She opened the door, letting him in without a word. He walked slowly, trailing his hand along a rack of dresses, eyes full of something like regret. "Did you really build all this?" She nodded once. "Every stitch." He stood there for a while, surrounded by soft colors, handmade labels, and the scent of lavender and cotton. "She left," he finally said. "Turns out, she wasn't who I thought she was. And I wasn't who she thought I was either." He chuckled bitterly. "But this? You? I didn't expect this." Her voice was calm. "That's because you never really saw me. You saw your version of me. But I always knew what I was capable of." He nodded, defeated. And then, she turned away to finish cleaning the counter, leaving him to stand alone in a room full of everything she'd become without him. 2 days after the visit, he messaged her, asking for dinner. No pressure. Just conversation. "I'd like to explain myself," he wrote. She debated for hours, then agreed, not out of longing, but curiosity. They met at a small bistro downtown. It was one they used to frequent in better times. He had reserved a corner table, tried to smile, but his eyes gave away more than his words. Over wine and a quiet meal, he began to speak. "I was foolish. I thought younger meant better. I thought excitement mattered more than loyalty." She let him talk, the way she used to, but this time, she listened differently. The words no longer held power. They were just echoes. "I miss us," he said. "I miss the way you made everything feel safe." She put her fork down gently. "You don't miss me," she said. "You miss having a place to land. But I'm not that place anymore. I'm not yours to come home to." He sat back, speechless. The silence between them stretched long, then settled. They finished the meal in near silence. When it was over, she walked away without looking back. The next morning, he sent one final message. "Please think about it. We had a life together." She read it slowly, then deleted it without replying. There was no anger left. Just clarity. She had mourned the marriage already. Now, she was living her own story. She walked to the studio, opened the door to the smell of new fabric, and sat at her machine. The needle hummed, and she breathed in rhythm with it, focused, steady, whole. That evening, she told her daughter about the dinner. The young woman listened carefully, her face unreadable. "Did you feel anything?" she asked. The mother thought for a moment, then answered, "Distance. Like he's still standing at a station I passed a long time ago." Her daughter reached out and took her hand. "You're the strongest woman I know." And in that moment, she believed it too. One morning, while packaging a dress for shipping, she opened her inbox and paused. There was an email from a local TV station. A producer had seen the viral photo and wanted to feature her on a morning show. Her story, they wrote, was inspiring women everywhere. Her first instinct was to say no. Cameras. Questions. Exposure. It all felt like too much. But then she remembered all the women who had messaged her. Who had said, "I needed to hear your story." Maybe this wasn't about her anymore. The day of the interview, she wore her signature dress, ivory with soft blue stitching. On camera, her voice shook at first, but then grew stronger with each word. She spoke about betrayal, resilience, and rediscovering worth after loss. "I didn't start with a plan," she said. "Just a needle, some fabric, and a broken heart. But I stitched something new. And I think we all can." When the segment aired, the boutique's orders doubled. But more than that, her inbox was once again filled with stories. And this time, she replied not as a victim, but as a guide. The online store had grown beyond anything she imagined, but her home was no longer enough. With the help of her children and a small loan, she found a humble retail space just a few blocks from the bakery. It had cracked tiles, dusty shelves, and worn walls, but to her, it was perfect. Over weeks, they painted, decorated, brought in racks and mannequins. She sewed the curtains herself and designed the storefront window to display her proudest pieces. The name above the door, in gold-painted wood, Rebirth. On the morning of the grand opening, she arrived early, heart racing. She didn't expect much, maybe a few curious neighbors. But when she unlocked the door, there was already a line. Women of all ages stood outside, some holding hands, others holding tears. "I've followed your journey online," one said. "I just wanted to tell you, you helped me leave him." Another whispered, "You made me believe I still matter." As the door opened and the store filled, she stood back and watched, not just her customers, but a room full of survivors. In the middle of the crowd, just as she was adjusting a display, a hush spread across the boutique. She looked toward the entrance and saw him. Her ex-husband. He stood awkwardly at the doorway, wearing an old blazer and an expression she couldn't read. A few women noticed him, some whispering, some staring. He stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room slowly. "I heard about the store," he said, voice low. "I wanted to see it with my own eyes." She didn't raise her voice or ask him to leave. Instead, she gestured lightly toward the racks. "Take a look," she said simply. He touched a linen dress and ran his fingers along the embroidered sleeve. "You made all this?" he asked, as if trying to make sense of what stood before him. She nodded. "Every stitch." He looked around again, then back at her. "I never thought you'd become this." Her reply came calmly, "That's because you never really knew me." And with that, she turned to help a customer, leaving him in the quiet wake of what he'd once taken for granted. The next day, he returned, not to disrupt, but to leave something behind. A letter. He handed it to one of her employees with a request, "Please give this to her. I won't come again." She found the envelope on her desk that evening. For a while, she debated reading it. Then, slowly, she opened it. His handwriting was neat, familiar. The words were unlike any he'd ever said out loud. "You were always more than I gave you credit for. I realize now that I didn't leave you because you failed me, I left because I couldn't keep up with you." The letter wasn't a plea, nor a promise. It was a confession. A man finally seeing what he had missed for years. "I've lost everything," he wrote, "but I hope you know that you gave me the chance to find something better in myself." She folded the letter, placed it in a box with other old memories, and closed the lid. There was no need to reply. Some apologies are better left acknowledged, not answered. And this time, she had no more questions, only peace. He stopped coming. She heard through mutual acquaintances that his life had unraveled: unemployment, debt, isolation. But she felt no bitterness. Only a distant, quiet compassion. She didn't celebrate his downfall. She simply understood that life has its own way of leveling things. She had taken her pain and turned it into purpose. He had taken his ease and lost it to regret. And so, their stories continued, separate, as they were always meant to be. One afternoon, during a charity event she hosted in the boutique for women rebuilding after divorce, she stood up to speak. Dozens of women filled the small space, sipping tea, browsing clothing, sharing stories. She looked around at the sea of brave faces and said, "I don't stand here because I wasn't broken. I stand here because I chose not to stay broken." The applause was soft but heartfelt. Among the crowd were women just like her, mothers, daughters, survivors. She wasn't just selling clothes anymore. She was stitching dignity back into people's lives. Seasons changed. Her business expanded. She began teaching sewing classes in the evenings, welcoming women who had lost their direction and were searching for a way forward. "You don't need to be perfect," she would tell them. "Just willing." They'd laugh, fumble with fabric, and little by little, begin to stitch again, not just with thread, but with hope. Every garment, every story, became part of a tapestry of second chances. She learned through quiet sources that her ex-husband had moved away. No new marriage, no big career. Just a quiet life now. One that mirrored his choices. She didn't feel triumphant, only free. Free from the ache, the need to prove anything, the shadows of her former life. The woman who once stood at the stove, trembling with an envelope in her hand, no longer existed. In her place stood someone whole, someone radiant, someone who had sewn herself back together, by hand. It was during a local artisan meetup that she met David. A widower, quiet-spoken, and owner of a small woodcraft studio, he complimented the labels on her clothing rack. "These are beautiful," he said, pointing to the hand-stitched tags on each garment. "You design all this yourself?" She nodded, used to small talk, not expecting much. But there was something about his presence, unhurried, calm, that lingered. He didn't ask for more than she offered. He simply stood there and listened with genuine interest. Over the next few weeks, they exchanged small greetings at the bakery, then longer chats at the market. When he finally asked if she wanted to have coffee, she hesitated, more out of habit than fear. But she said yes. With David, everything felt different. No wait. No need to prove anything. You're whole, he told her one day. I don't want to fix anything. I just want to witness it. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to be seen again. One evening, after closing the shop, her daughter surprised her with a bouquet of wildflowers and an impromptu visit. They sat together in the back garden, drinking herbal tea under a string of soft lights. The daughter spoke first. You know, there was a time I was afraid I'd become like you, she said gently. Not because of who you are now, but because of how much you gave up before. The mother nodded slowly, heart quiet. But now, her daughter continued, if I could be half the woman you are today, I'd be proud of myself. Her voice cracked slightly. You're my compass. The words landed like a soft breeze and yet carried the weight of years of healing. They embraced without speaking. It wasn't just a mother and daughter, it was two women who had survived, who had learned, and who now walked side by side, not in the shadow of anyone, but in their own light. On a quiet Sunday, she returned to the park where she used to ride her bike, back when she was learning to breathe again. The trees had changed with the seasons, the benches repainted, but the stillness remained. She sat under an old oak tree and watched the world move, families walking, couples laughing, children playing. Once, she had sat in this very spot wondering how she would survive the pain. Now, she sat wondering how she had ever doubted her strength. She took a small notebook from her bag and opened to a blank page. With a smooth pen, she wrote the word freedom in cursive. Not for a post, not for anyone else, just for her. It had taken time, tears, and the unraveling of everything she once thought was permanent. But sitting there, she realized that what she had gained was so much more than what she lost. She didn't just rebuild her life. She rewrote its foundation. When she returned home that evening, there was a letter waiting in her mailbox. The handwriting was unmistakably his. For a moment, she stood frozen, then opened it calmly. Inside were only a few lines. Thank you for not taking me back. It was the only way I learned. You were never the problem, I was the one too small to hold someone so strong. I hope you're happy. You deserve to be. There was no request, no apology, just quiet closure. She folded the letter neatly and placed it in the same wooden box where she kept old photos and past love notes. It no longer held pain, only history. She smiled, not out of triumph, but understanding. Sometimes the things that hurt the most become the very soil from which something greater can grow. That letter wasn't a door reopening, it was the final brick in a wall she no longer needed to lean on. A year after the boutique's opening, she launched a new collection. Each dress in the line was named after a part of her journey: silence, courage, closure, rebirth. But the centerpiece was a long, flowing ivory dress with hand-embroidered navy vines twisting gently around the hem and neckline. She named it Freedom. It was the most delicate thing she had ever created, and the most powerful. At the anniversary event, she wore the dress herself. As she stepped outside to greet the line forming around the block, applause erupted. Her children stood at her side. David took her hand. Customers old and new embraced her. And as she looked up at the sign above her door, Rebirth, she felt no need to prove anything to anyone anymore. She had become everything she once believed she couldn't live without. She touched the embroidery at her chest and whispered quietly to herself, "This was always me. I just needed to remember."